In the previous video, we talked about lists and strings. Here I want to talk about lists and two similar data types, tuples and sets. So let's define my list just like before, 3141. And that's a list. And let's define a tuple with the same elements in it. So I'll say my tuple equals, and then here the way that Python knew it was a list was because of this square bracket. And here, the way Python is going to know this is a tuple is with a round parenthesis. So not my tuple, 3141. Okay, and then let's do one more. My set equals 3141. And instead of a square bracket or a round parenthesis, here we use this curly bracket for set. Okay, and so let's check that these really are what I say they are. So my tuple, yes, that's a tuple. My set, type of my set, yep, that's a set. Okay, so what are some similarities or differences between these? I mean, a similarity is they were certainly all made in basically the same way. The only difference was the notation that we used for how to construct it. What about differences? Well, let me start with maybe the easiest difference to understand. Let's look at my set. So this is quite different from what we told it to be. So if you've taken Math 13, for example, then you know that sets do not have repeated elements and that sets do not have a notion of order. And that is the same. So that's the mathematical convention, what I was just saying. And Python follows the same as the mathematical conventions. So my set, like, it's easy to look at this and think, okay, sets are always sorted, but that's not true. Like, for example, if I try to ask what's the initial element in my set, I get this error. Okay, unlike my tuple, where I get 3, and as we already saw in the other video, my list bracket 0, that gives me 3. So this indexing does work for lists and tuples. It does not work for sets because sets do not have a notion of order, either in Python, neither in Python nor in mathematics do they have a notion of order. And what is the length of these things? So just like you would expect, length of my tuple is 4. The length of my set, okay, that's 3 because the repeated element 1 got removed from my set. So 1 is in there, but it's only in there once, okay, as we can see here. So that's some similarities and differences between these. What about lists versus tuples? Like, so far those seem exactly the same. Well, the big difference is that a list is something that can change, whereas a tuple, once you've constructed it, you cannot change it. So, for example, we've already seen this indexing, like my list bracket 2 is 4, and we can change this. We can say my list bracket 2 equals 17. Okay, and then if I look at my list, we can see that that element in the second index slot that has gotten changed to 17. So, the point of this is to show you that my list, after I've constructed it, the values in it are allowed to change. Okay, it's what's called mutable. Okay, mutable, the word there, it's similar to the beginning of the word mutation, like they have the same root. Tuples, on the other hand, I think of them as being immutable. I guess more technically, they're immutable as long as the elements inside of them are immutable. But in general, most tuples you work with will be immutable. So, let's try to do the same thing, like my tuple brackets 2. It's 4, just like my list bracket 2 was. But if I try to assign this, okay, then I get this type error. Tuple object does not support item assignment. Okay, so that is one difference. Another difference, I could do my list dot append 8. And now if I look at my list, it has this 8 added to the end of it. Whereas, so again, think of that as changing my list. Okay, this dot append 8, it changed my list. On the other hand, if I do my tuple dot append 8, maybe I get kind of similar error to before, although this one's called an attribute error. And so that's saying that dot append, that does not exist for when this variable here, when that's something of type tuple. A tuple object has no attribute append. Okay, so that's some difference between tuples and lists, but maybe from that presentation, it seems like lists are strictly better than tuples. Like, why would you ever want to use a tuple when it has all this less functionality than a list does? So let me just quickly show you one example of a place where tuples can be used that lists cannot. Let's try to make uh, a set 3, 1, and then I'm going to put a tuple here, 4, comma 1. Okay, and let's call this new set. And if I check what's the type of new set, I get that it's still a set. Good. If I check what's the length of new set, so you see what the length of this set is? Well, that's like saying how many things are inside of it. So there's 1, there's 2, and then you should count this as just a single tuple. So there are 3 things inside of new set. Okay, and so notice here we used a tuple. On the other hand, let's try to do this using a list instead of a tuple for this 4, 1. If I say 3, 1, and then 4, 1, it's in square brackets, so this should be a list. And so I get this error that says unhashable type list. And so the only things that are allowed to go inside a set are what are called hashable objects in Python. And lists are never hashable. And so in this case, I'm not allowed to put a list into a set. So maybe we'll talk about it, maybe we won't, what this hashable means. But for now, what I most want you to know is that tuples are not allowed to be changed once you've created them, whereas lists are. And tuples are allowed to go in a set, whereas, at least in general, they're allowed to go in a set, whereas lists are never allowed to go in a set. Okay, that's where I'll stop this video. Thank you for watching.